Welcome to the Carasoft Data Center Innovation Series, where we dive into the trends and issues shaping the future of data centers in the public sector. I'm your host, Carasoft Consulting CTO Scott Robon. The focus of today's episode is on innovation in data center computing. The hunger for compute, especially with the rise of AI, is driving all sorts of new technology and new delivery models in the data center arena. To help us unpack all this, we're thrilled to have Robin Braun, VP of AI Business Development and Hybrid Cloud at HPE, to talk about what she's seeing in compute innovation, consumption, and delivery across the industry. So let's dive in. Robin, welcome. It's great to have you here. Can you give listeners a brief intro of yourself, your history in the data center market, and your role today?
Thanks, Scott. Really appreciate yourself and the Carasoft team to have me join the podcast today. And when you look at the data center market or being in high tech or now AI, it really has been an evolution. So I've now been at HPE for several months, focusing on AI business development with our hybrid cloud team. Before that, I was actually working with a federally focused reseller for the past year as their VP of AI and data strategy, really leaning into my passion to, kind of help the government solve their mission through kind of innovative technologies. Before that, I'd actually worked with several AI ISVs in kind of their go-to-market, how to kind of connect to that end customer, helped take one to acquisition, stayed with the acquiring company for a year. And before that, I was actually at another OEM, and which is where I started working with AI and NVIDIA. But that was where I felt that transition from how do I help people store data? How do I help them, uh, uh, back up their data, all of those sort of things you do with data, to how do we actually help them use the data? And that's where I found in my conversations with CIOs and COOs and CXOs that it really became much more about how do we start to use and unlock the wealth of knowledge that's in that data versus just kind of maintaining it.
No doubt. And, I had the privilege of going and listening to some of your previous podcasts since we last spoke, just to get a feel of, your journey. And yeah, you've touched on so many important pieces of the migration to AI. Before we zoom right there, let's start out just by touching on, what's happened with computing CPUs and GPUs, just real briefly over the last few years. Gone are the days of 286, 386, 486. Now Intel chips are named, AMD has come to the market, and now we have these things called GPUs that are no longer just for graphics. What's your snapshot on how that's accelerated over the last 5 years?
The pace of innovation is incredibly hard to keep up with. We used to have kind of to your point, we had it was 286 and 386, kind of this orderly progression, and everything was kind of governed by Moore's law. And
Right.
and I love watching Jensen on stage at his keynotes at GTC. But he's also right when he says that Moore's law is no longer the law of the land, and that the innovation, the pace of innovation from a performance perspective, and what that then allows us to start to unlock, and the size of the data sets and research and questions you're answering, what all of that starts to help you unlock in a more timely fashion, is just exponential growth. And what we're doing this year with, the buzzword of the year being agentic AI, when you
Sure.
just think back 3 years ago or 5 years ago and what the GPUs were able to do then, wouldn't be able to keep up with the type of processing that's required to drive those type of workflows that we see today. Uh, and CPUs and GPUs are just fundamentally kind of they're a different processing type. One is more serial and does an amazing at kind of that database transaction and execution, and one with that parallel processing with GPUs being able to do kind of the learning workloads and the intelligent workloads, and being able to massively parallelize those activities. They work in tandem, they work in harmony in that system, and they're both vitally important to be able to help us in the end get to those outputs that our customers are looking for. When you see NVIDIA being able to bring the CPU and the GPU together on kind of the same chipsets, and that's something you wouldn't have thought about 3 to 5 years ago.
Right.
Well, obviously they were thinking about it, but mere mortals like myself weren't necessarily thinking about it. And and you see where Intel's going as they're continuing to lean in, and then AMD's doing fantastic things with their ability to drive performance, to drive cores and a footprint. So it's just an exciting time to be able to watch the innovation, to be engaged with it, and to really then see, and where I love to lean in the space of what does that help us do for the end customer, and what does that help us unlock for them as they look at delivering results.
For sure. I couldn't agree with you more on that. And we're just a couple of mere mortals here talking about this, so I feel like I'm in good company. Um, so let's go toward how do we actually help the end user. The next step to hit is, those CPUs and GPUs get packaged in systems, and systems go into data centers. So let's touch on the systems first. With your home being HPE, you see some interesting trends here, I'm sure, with what's going in to these systems today and some of the challenges and ways you're overcoming those challenges with packaging in servers and systems.
I feel incredibly grateful and lucky to be at HPE. I love the focus on engineering, really what they're doing to answer the challenges that we see from our customers, that our customers are experiencing, and but also staying on that edge with NVIDIA and Intel and AMD to be able to bring that together. I happily sit in the organization that created Private Cloud for AI, where we jointly innovate together with NVIDIA on bringing out a pre-configured AI stack that somebody can much more easily stand up. So it's
Sure.
always front of mind of how do we help the customer kind of solve their challenges. I think some of the biggest things, and I'd love obviously to hear your perspective as well, is that we talk about the technology, and we all love talking about technology. We love the blinky lights and what it does. But some of the things that I hear most frequently from our customers are kind of the limitations of their data center, or their limitations of how do they construct the that computing, that infrastructure environment as they go forward, not to say it has to be in four walls of a specific data center. And that the power draw that we talk about at GTC, where you see that incredibly dense rack, and that it doesn't necessarily need to have airflow anymore because it's all going to be
Right.
liquid cooled. And you saw probably all half of the data center folks in the audience probably blanched, like, where are they going to get liquid cooling support from? So I think there's this amazing innovation happening, and then our customers are kind of living in that tactical, practical of, how do I now consume that and make it real? And I think that's an area where HPE is very focused, and the industry is very focused on trying to help solve the, how do we get from here to there in a way that helps bring everybody along.
Yeah, and that is a significant challenge because it's hard to bring everybody along at the same time. Let's come back to that thought for sure. Just the impact on infrastructure, just like you called out, this incredible reduction of space and densification of compute in the data center, is putting more and more weight in a given, rack footprint, more and more components in a rack footprint, driving the need for, new cooling techniques, new data center design, and so forth. And I think that sets up a huge issue in terms of, not everybody's going to be able to build this for themselves. Maybe even most consumers won't be building this for themselves. We've seen this movie before, right? With just general compute and the emergence of cloud providers, right? We used to, that what we now call bare metal, but like that dedicated server per application, right? Then we saw the advent of server virtualization. Let me slice up and get, cycles back from idle time on servers, to being able to do incredible things with, scaling up, scaling down very quickly with the amount of compute I need, and so forth. I'm sorry, I don't want to make this a cloud tutorial, but it seems like there are going to be parallels for the delivery of GPU and support of AI workloads. Well, you obviously have a perspective here. What are you seeing, and what do you think is coming on that front?
So I think everybody is, there's so much excitement about AI.
Hmm.
Um, and AI means something different to every person, but there's an excitement and a belief that regardless of where people kind of are in that transition, in that embrace, in that journey, that over time, AI is going to be part of how they run their mission or their operation or their
Hmm.
business. It'll be part of our day-to-day life. And how do we prepare for that? How do we support that? And some of that is, and one of the things that we have fundamentally looked at is, what does a hybrid environment look like? There are going to be areas where you know, it's much more cost effective to run a lot of the GPU compute within kind of your proximity rather than necessarily on a hyperscaler.
Sure.
But I think one of the things that will be answered, and probably different answers for different customers, but as we start to think about it, how will they define what data center means to them over time? Does that start to mean perhaps it's their data center, in air quotes, but it's actually hosted in an environment that can accommodate kind of all of these new technologies and cooling technologies and weight and things of that nature?
Right.
Or is it where they can retrofit their data center in specific areas or ways to accommodate for new technologies? I certainly believe there's probably a number of folks in the government that the data center is just not in an area that's going to be very conducive to that in a cost effective manner. But
Sure.
everybody's going to have to do some of that analysis and consideration. Are they going to want to build something out? We definitely see a lot of those discussions from our professional services teams who can, with kind of the experience and background that HPE has and HPC, kind of help coach and do a lot of kind of input there around best practices for how to approach some of these new technologies. And then there's, an area that I'm finding kind of interesting in what has been called kind of neo cloud, in these new providers who are providing cloud like services, uh, perhaps on something like a PCAI or other platforms, but also providing orchestration layers, or they're providing, kind of compute and infrastructure somebody else is offering, but doing it in a cloud-like fashion so that somebody can consume it. But it
Sure.
doesn't necessarily have to go all the way to a hyperscaler. It can be dedicated. It can be, kind of offer different value practices. So I think it's a really interesting question as we look at the combination of different approaches people are taking to being prepared for the speed of innovation, the speed of change in the technology, and how do you keep up with that, and how do you consume it, and and be prepared for kind of continued evolution over the next number of years.
You cited a really interesting scenario for me previously, where you talked about, the GPUs I bought 3 4 years ago may already be obsolete, and may hold me back from actually supporting the missions or the objectives that I have. But this neo cloud concept is those neo cloud providers the ability to go do more rapid tech refresh. I think I might be putting words in your mouth, but can you unpack that for us a little bit?
Absolutely, and that's a great question, Scott, and I appreciate your bringing it up. The discussion around, when we look back, like I was saying, maybe the government, in particular, is known for affectionately holding on to their technology for a lengthier period of time, shall we say.
Sure.
And the and one of the challenges that I see with that is, as agentic workflows are becoming more prevalent, or will become more prevalent, as we consider new models, and there's a new model I think like every hour. It's crazy, like kind of the proliferation and speed at the innovation for AI is staying at.
Totally amazing. Yep.
Yeah, when you start to look at what does it take now to adequately or effectively run these models to be able to produce insights and output, if you're doing it on 5-year-old GPU technology, it's going to take a while, or it may not even run depending on the memory size because of the size of the model that you may be trying to load. So that if you're not staying on the not necessarily the bleeding edge, but up current or more current, in like the last few years of technology, that it can start to hold back the type of technology choices you would make to support your mission or your objective. And how do you start to bring that together? Those are some of the reasons we have things like Green Lake, where we look at that type of consumption and being able to support kind of that ongoing estate maintenance essentially for a customer. But to your point, it's also where kind of these neo clouds and other type of offerings really start to help support the customers as well. So I think, when I look at it, my advice to customers is really around, don't just think about what you need to buy today, which is certainly important. Don't get me wrong, certainly evaluate that and understand it, but also think about where things are going. You're going to own this for the next 3 years. But you're not necessarily going to see, have the same value in 7 years, maybe not even in 5 years.
Right.
It's unlikely because of the performance jumps that we're seeing from NVIDIA being so transformational in what they unlock from a technology perspective. So I think it's starting to bring up the notion of, for lack of a better term, tech refresh, but staying current in a way that's different than just something that we would like to do. I think it starts to become something that we need to consider as you make that investment and journey in with the AI.
I think we're seeing a wicked hockey stick of that rate of change of innovation, that rapid pace. And the examples that we've had before, things that we've lived through may not give us even the right context for the acceleration we're going through right now. If I just to use a side tech example of holding on to technology, you stated that so nicely. We haven't said the word tech debt yet, and I'll just say it. Um, I look at the reliance of government applications and networking on older TDM technologies, copper wires and hundreds of thousands of deployed devices that are limited in their comms capability because they're tied to a technology that's gating what they can actually do. It's proven technology, it works. It was designed for a mission 30 years ago. Um, but the advances in communications don't even come close to the advances in what we're seeing with the infrastructure for AI and the model availability and model processing. Again, it's just moving so much faster, I feel like, than anything we've ever seen before in our careers.
Yeah, I would completely agree, Scott. When you see the adoption and you look at even technology examples and you see when did TikTok, when did LinkedIn get to 100 million users? When did TikTok get to
Right.
100 million users?
Yep.
And then how fast did ChatGPT get to it? And that was in months, as opposed to, over a series of months or over years. And the rapid adoption of the technology, the interest. And I'm not saying that you're running your mission on ChatGPT, that's
Sure. Yeah.
analogous, but the notion of the engagement, and Jensen called it kind of the iPhone moment for the transformer based model for generative AI. And I think that it really was, when you start to look at, fundamentally people started to consider, how do I just have a summary of that? How can I just
Sure.
ask a question and get an answer rather than search for it. I was telling a group I was working with, I was like, I'm not going to search for that. Where can I just ask a question? And channeling my, best inner 25-year-old. The and it was just really funny because we now very, very quickly have gotten to think about that in our personal lives. And I don't think it's a jump to think about, particularly as we continue to have people come into the workforce, that there's an expectation of how they interface to the technology in their work environment in a very similar way.
Right. I wonder if, like I remember with cloud adoption and some of the early, government initiatives in, you've got to find an application to move to the cloud. You've got to find something to move to the cloud. And one of the first things that hit me early on was, the NASA use case of rendering imagery from a mission. And I think it was from one of the Mars missions. There's all those concerns about security and putting workloads in a facility that's not under our direct control. But I don't want to build, a data center for, peak imagery rendering day, right? I want to have, just like the hybrid model you spoke of before. I've got my facilities for day-to-day operations, but there are going to be events where I need to burst into other resources and use those resources. And that was one of the things that personally convinced me that, yep, the cloud model is really going to get adoption here for all sorts of federal applications. Can you see, or are you already seeing those use cases that will help government users get to that hybrid neo cloud model? Again, I'm being creative with terminology here, but I think you know where I'm going. Tell me what you think.
I think I have two answers to that, and one is, and I find it one of the most intriguing parts about AI as I work and talk with different customers about adoption and how did they get started. But one of the first use cases, and it may be because we frequently, all of us are a victim to it, is how do they deal with their inbox? How can they simplify that AI, using it as that personal assistant rather than necessarily program focused,
Sure.
looking at it more from like a personal focused. And how can they, and then going like, okay, well, now how can I find data more easily? Because I think any large scale organization, finding the answer you need is typically a challenge on various sliding scales of difficulty. It doesn't matter how well you've laid out the data in directory formats. By the time you're like a directory or two level down, like who knows where you are. The so I would say that that's one of the interesting parts of AI is kind of starting on that personal frame and people getting comfortable with it in their day-to-day life, or kind of being able to get those summaries of their email as that starts to be integrated in inboxes, things like that. When
Right.
you start to think about it at a program level, how do you look at what do you need as you scale? And that's where I think it becomes interesting to look at, um, how do you start with a pilot? How do you start with those proof of concepts? But how do we help people kind of cross that chasm? We can all see the stats that 90% or 89% or whatever percentage you would like to quote today, a very high percentage of things that start as pilots don't necessarily go and scale into production. And there's all sorts of reasons for that.
Sure.
Some of it being they don't have the infrastructure, which then gets to your question of, well, how do you start to sustainably grow out that infrastructure without necessarily scaling to your peak day, but also starting to recognize that the cost at, like clouds are amazing to do rapid prototyping, but when you start to look at, I'm actually going to scale it across 6,000, 60,000 users,
Sure.
that may not be the most cost effective or most efficient way to roll that out. And you might want to start again looking at that hybrid or being able to have the cloud experience, but in an on-prem, whatever on-prem environment looks like to you, whether that's hosted or in a data center or neo cloud or whatever that environment or term you want to use around it. And so I think that there's a lot of interesting pieces that start to come up from workflow, from engagement, but also just from that blocking and tackling, that where we started around kind of infrastructure, um, and and the infrastructure not just at the hardware and software layer, but below that of the concrete, the the racks, the all of
That's
those
right.
things, the air conditioning, the power. Uh, and I was even having a fascinating conversation just yesterday around kind of the sustainability of power, and that the innovation that's actually happening from a power perspective, and you're starting to see entities purchasing kind of personal nuclear power plants, and what does that start to do or change, or what is the model of power from not only a consumption but generation as we go forward, and the
Yep.
sustainability of that and things of that nature. So I think there's a lot of innovation happening, and we're kind of in a race to see how it all turns out. It's such an exciting time to be in.
Yeah, you and I both share that excitement. And I think one of the interesting multiplicative factors here is it's innovation on multiple fronts. It's what's happening at the chip level, what's happening with systems, what's happening with densification that's driving the need for 300 kilowatts in a rack to 600 kilowatts in a rack to someday a megawatt in a rack. How that's pushing all sorts of construction issues, how that's making site location with availability to energy production even more important. All these things come together in the data center story that our customers collectively need to be thinking about making smart decisions on. There's one thing I want to touch on before we have to wind this down. With your background in data storage and data, uh, the term data science was really hot a few years ago. It seems to have taken the backstage to now AI and agentic processing, but none of this works well without good data. And given your industry perspective, is there anything you can share on the need for customers to be thinking about cleaning up their data and providing good data sets?
Thank you so much for asking about that. I get pretty passionate when it comes to data. The One of the big things I think that is important, and where I still think there is a real need for data scientists, isn't necessarily in as much of cleaning the data, but of understanding the data that's being used to make decisions.
Hmm.
Because if you're using we've all understand bad data in, out. But it's not necessarily whether it's bad data, it's, are you using the right data sets uh,
Sure.
to answer the question that you're trying to answer? And and so I think that understanding what data you have is important so that you can get to the root of the questions, whether that's whatever it's about, whether it's about how you execute on your mission or how you run your business, or whatever that is that you're trying to have better insight into, that making sure you're looking at the right metrics allows you to then have better output, like I was saying, around good data in, better output, which allows you to then draw better decision making, better insights, and hopefully be able to move more quickly. Um, but when I think about people are worried about good data, because originally, we talked about data lakes, and I now refer to it as more data mud puddles, and that you can instead kind of connect the data mud puddles and bring them together, because so much of the technologies now can do that. And I think that's really important, that our customers don't have to fear like they can't do AI because they don't have a massive data lake. It's all okay. It can be connected. Don't worry. Um, Keep calm, enjoy your data. The
Very good.
But when they nobody's data is clean. Some areas are worse than others. One of the things that I'm excited for the promise of, and I'm not going to say it's, necessarily all there, but month by month it changes dramatically how well and how there it is that with the abilities of agentic AI now to come in, and I've done some things with one of our partners, Kamiwaza, and it was amazing at the ability of that it had to be able to not only bring in data, but to transform it and to recognize where there were outliers that needed to be nullified because they were actually null values, and that it would completely skew the entire data set if you kept them in there. And the fact that it was able to help identify that so much more rapidly than if I were sat there with, a billion rows of data and trying to comb through it, and just the sheer concept of that visual is kind of humorous. Is so that I think it shows such amazing promise, is what I would say, in being able to help people overcome the challenges that they've had with their data, start to understand how much of it is usable, start to look at are there areas where it can help make the data more usable, and to start to bring that together. So that to me is one of the great promises of agentic AI, is being able to help us with the data conundrum that we have today, and to help us start to go mud puddle by mud puddle and start to get at better insights.
Well, the positive attitude will not hurt any of us, right? I think there's a lot of fear about how to connect those mud puddles and how to sort through this stuff, and we have to be looking at what the positive outcomes can be here, and definitely appreciate that perspective. As we close out this episode, I think about Green Lake and what you've done from a consumption model, the things that you're doing. And the emerging class of neo cloud providers, and them bringing the expertise to manage the infrastructure, deal with the compute, build those orchestration layers. What else would you want to call out that HPE is doing on the GreenLake front or otherwise in this arena?
Well, I did touch on kind of the private cloud for AI before, which I think has so much promise to help simplify for IT how to manage the AI environment for the business by being able to leverage the pre-integrated AI stack on it, being able to take advantage of NVIDIA blueprints and NIMs, or to work with our ISV ecosystem that I'm helping to bring together. I'm so excited for what the partners that we have on Unleash AI. They're doing just the coolest things. I get so excited when I get to talk with them and work with them. That we are, from a technology perspective, trying to help make it more consumable for our customers to consume those solutions, and to help get over the fear of getting started and to help them get started. I think the abilities with simplifying the management, uh, the Morpheus team that is also now part of hybrid cloud. I love what they're able to do around simplifying that cloud operations and really embracing that it is a hybrid world. And how do we help our customers manage that in as seamless a fashion as possible? So there's just a lot of great. We keep talking about innovation, whether it's in AI or otherwise, but being able to do that and build out on the GreenLake platform that people are used to, and continuing to expand that further. And I also want to say I greatly appreciate the partnership with Carasoft. We've been doing an really impactful series of AI/ML days out across the US, and I've been able to attend a few, really love the feedback from customers, and being able to kind of get their input on their personal journeys, as well as sometimes see what they're doing and hear how they're implementing AI, or doing really cool research projects. And it's just so exciting to see what everybody's doing.
I think the opportunities that you and I have respectively from the HP and Carasoft position, those events are in critical customer feedback where we get to hear exactly what they're trying to do, and then we get to noodle it and say, well, okay, here's how I can help you with the pieces of the puzzle that I bring to the table. And we enjoy our relationship with HPE, and as part of what we're doing here in building the Carahsoft data center story, and with that emphasis on AI, we both need to continue to keep working, arm in arm, and be responsive to what our customers really need. So, look, this has been wonderful. Robin, thank you so much for coming on. Any last words or anything you want to point people to for additional information?
Excited to continue the partnership. There's always a fantastic running event schedule with Caresoft that I'm sure goes out through the end of the year. If I look at my calendar, I'm sure it does. So would always encourage folks to be able to check there, to be able to see where they can plug into these sessions as well. And of course, so delighted to have the for folks to check out that ongoing series of AI ML days that we have out with Caresoft and HPE together. Lots of great ones coming up that working with the team on, as well as I would encourage as they're starting to really grapple with how to approach this ongoing technical cycle, to think about what can things like Greenlight help with, how can they leverage technologies like PCAI to get started quickly, and be able to build out, really to that factory scale as they look out over time. But in the end, regardless of where they're getting started, I think just for them to know that we're all trying to take a very thoughtful approach to supporting their journey and helping them to execute on their mission.
Excellent. Robin Braun of HPE, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. And to our listeners, Caresoft community, thank you so much for tuning into the Caresoft Data Center Innovation Series. Keep listening for more aspects of what we're doing with our industry partners to bring data center solutions to you and our federal and public sector partners. We'll talk to you next time.